And if you're not educated about what's going on, you go out and buy the new Apple phone, man, instead of taking that money and buying Oracle stock, because Oracle stock's going to go up, and then you just do all of that. And so you just keep going, and then you just stay in that place. And I found the students, look, you want to do something about inequality, learn about money management, man. Learn about what all this stuff is. And that was my take. I mean, that was just my little tiny contribution to the world. To what degree do your friends, like your generation, to what degree are people just accepting or thinking that, you know what? It's kind of the luck of the draw, man. You get in a certain position, you have parents that can pay for your college, or you take loans or whatever, and then it's just up to each individual to work, do what they can do with that. To what degree is this a story that you got to tell ourselves in order for us to just make sense of everything that we've seen today?
Compared to how you were raised within like wealth and stuff, are you thinking about your kids' future within like money and things like that? And like, are you raising them differently to how you were raised when it regards to like what you're thinking about their career? Because I remember you mentioned that, and I wanted to know your thoughts on that.
I'm raising him to have financial literacy. And I taught high school for 20 years, and I was really like always bothered by the fact that it wasn't required in the state of Pennsylvania to have some sort of like course or portion of a course absolutely dedicated to financial literacy. It really bothered me because I think young people, if I go back to what I didn't know about managing money, whatever income level you're at, like learning how to manage money. So that bothers me as a society. I feel like it's a shortcoming. But yeah, I do like we talk a lot, and he's interested in economics, or he's just got a lot of interest. But yeah, I talk a lot about financial literacy in our house, and our family talks a lot about it too. Because I came from poverty on both sides of my family. Like my grandfather had to quit school at age 13 in the Depression to earn money for his family. On one side, on the other side, both my grandparents were immigrants here, coming dirt poor from Eastern Europe. So I guess I think about it in that way.
And they did well.
Well, one grandfather did very well financially for the 13-year-old. The other grandparents struggled their whole life.
But you say that, though, as a person who is highly educated. You have your undergrad degree, you have a master's degree, you taught. Yeah. When I'm talking about the poorest, the working poor, it's not about financial. I mean, it's not there. It's not part of it. It's a very different kind of story, so to speak, right? And I'm just wondering,
So for me, like my background, like my parents grew up poor in Chicago, living in the projects, and like their upbringing now and like how I live today has a big impact on how I am. And so my biggest question is just what like change or like what flipped the switch to like become who you are today and sort of thing, because I know like from a lot of backgrounds, especially mine, it's not just an automatic like paycheck or family inheritance.
I like to learn, you know, and you never know where you're going to go or what's going to interest you or what's going to happen in the world and how that will impact where you're currently, you know, what you're currently working through. Law school made sense. And, you know, there's a ton of industries out there. You all have your majors. There's things that you are interested in, and there's things that you have no interest in at all. And that changes over time. And as you start getting interested in things that you start learning more things, that should never stop. That needs to always kind of stay switched on, because you need to grow and learn and experience as the world does, you know, like.
When you see the poorest 60%, the bottom 60% of the Americans are doing 25% of the spending compared to the other number, is anything like...
Well, you know, it's...
Because you don't see that. Like, you don't see it. Like, you know, right? You're not driving around into all these working poor areas and it's just really engaging and talking to people and seeing it. And
I mean, our economy is driven by people buying stuff and then throwing it away and then buying more stuff.
Yep.
And I think you see how something that's more expensive may have better material, may
Yep.
last longer. So you could see how maybe there's not as much spending.
Yeah, for sure. No, you're going to buy a $10,000 watch instead of a $10 watch. And that's a lot of where that comes from. You're going to buy a $100,000 car instead of a $25,000 car, and it's going to last longer. It's all sorts of things.
An inverse of this, though, just for thought, is I think those correlations are similar to the taxes paid. So the wealthy 10% probably pay more taxes than the poorest percentages, based on income.
There's a
and
poor
based on
percentage.
rates.
We don't know where the line is.
It's supposed to be a progressive sort of system where the more you make, the more you pay. But yeah, no, I'm stunned because people spend money. Like your phone is telling you to buy things now. You're asking, and you can't avoid it. And you're told that the more you spend, that's what drives the economy. And if Apple has a new phone or there's a new and if you stop, the economy's in trouble because people are satisfied with what they have.
And if you're not educated about what's going on, you go out and buy the new Apple phone, man, instead of taking that money and buying Oracle stock, because Oracle stock's going to go up, and then you just do all of that. And so you just keep going, and then you just stay in that place. And if you don't, by the way, when I used to teach the race and ethnic, you remember because you TA'd for it, I taught this class in African and African American studies called Race and Ethnic Inequality. It's a 400 level class. I taught it for about 13 years. And at one point, for about half the time, one of the required books that I had was a book on money management and understanding money and understanding how to manage money. And I found the students, look, you want to do something about inequality, learn about money management, man. Learn about what all this stuff is. And that was my take. I mean, that was just my little tiny contribution to the world. I don't know if anyone ever read it, but... Okay, bro, you have a comment, because then I'm going to go to the next slide.
Just that this feels like straight from the talking points of why the minimum wage needs to be increased. Because if, the lowest earners have more to spend, then these numbers can shift a little bit.
Even though there are problems with doing that. So, like businesses would say, like, yeah, that's a problem. But, okay, but that's something.
But as a business owner who would be subject to that minimum, we pay well beyond the minimum wage just because it seems like unfathomable to offer someone with the minimum wage.
I guess from things that I've heard in this conversation and from wealthy people overall, through time, it seems like they subconsciously associate their success with how far away from the bottom 50% they get and how much effort they put into thinking about the bottom 50% and how much they put into helping. So I guess my question with that is, at what point in becoming so wealthy do you find yourself thinking about it less and less, and how do you mark the start of giving back to that bottom 50%?
How about your parents? How often are they talking about when they used to be poor?
I feel like it's just a constant reminder that for them it was hard work and dedication, so that background, and then just reminding me that all of this is what we have can flip in an instant.
So they're constantly hammering you.
Yeah. So way. Back to what Lisa talked about with financial literacy, that was a major part of my parents teaching me understanding that at such an early age, Fidelity investments. I have an investment account, stuff like that. Even the little things we talk about here, I just feel like they're so important because anything can change in a moment. We look at the economy for a day-to-day basis, and then even your financial situation can go up or down, sort of thing. So it's always that constant mentality of being prepared financially as well.
So do you feel, let me ask the three of you, to what degree do your friends, your generation, to what degree are people just accepting or thinking that, you know what? It's kind of the luck of the draw, man. You get in a certain position, you have parents that can pay for your college, or you take loans or whatever, and then it's just up to each individual to work do what they can do with that. I mean, I'm wondering, because it's a different generation.
Yeah. A lot of my friends, at least the people I surround myself with, are very hardworking individuals, and they look at where they're at now, and they want to get more than that. They're so hardworking, like they're not just going to settle for what they have. They want to keep going, and they want to keep going, and they want to keep going. And I think that's very important to have the grit and ambition, because I feel like when you already have everything, a lot of people tend to lack purpose and ambition, and it's important to always have that ambition and grit.
So look at this. This is top 0.01% here. All the way to the top is 0.01 right here. This is the fabulously wealthy. Then you got the top 1% right here. Vivian, what you're saying here is, see, like these people here, they're trying to work just as hard as these people in the bottom 50%. Like there's not stopping them. No. So like when they're climbing this ladder of upward mobility, when you climb this thing and you get up here near the top, you're like, so let's say this is me. I'm right there in that top 1%. I'm not thinking that, hey, this is good. Like I got this. I want to get up here. I want to be in the 0.01%. So I'm going to keep working hard. And so what happens is then the working poor, the people down here in the 50%, so now we come all the way back here. They're trying to work really hard to get up there, but they got all these other people ahead of them. Mm-hmm. And wealth, Brian, wealth's making wealth. So it's like, yeah, your mom came from the Philippines, right? Okay, so she can start putting money in a retirement account, but that retirement account is like competing with these other folks that have generational wealth in a retirement account, and it's just sort of interesting. Like there's no other way to deal with it, just other than to say, just work hard.
Can I offer one other time, right? So the folks, I work with these corporate executives who are constantly stressed and have emails, but they have time outside of work more often than not where they can sit and think and rest. And if they're working hard, they're reading or writing or sending emails. Folks working double shifts at the factories, right, or at the plants, who are breaking their back 12-hour shift, like you don't have that time. And as you get older, you don't take your wealth with you, but you can't get your time back.
Okay, but that's not a problem inherently, right? Because earlier we decided, it sounded like, in a way, the three of you kind of agree with the three of them that, well, it's kind of the roll of the dice, man. So, like, you just work hard and you do the best you can. It's what I'm getting.
So, I actually don't agree with that. I know that I said, like, I was thinking philosophically about, like, where we're born and how we can't control the circumstances or the location in which we're born. But when we were walking, I was taking my son to the hub to get lunch, and we were talking about college and college tuition because we're on a campus. And he was asking questions, and I was answering them, and I was thinking about the fact that, like, I was telling him about how the cost of tuition has gone up astronomically more than the cost of wages and income. And so, I would be interested in hearing a little bit more about what you guys think about those structural pieces, because I'm not just okay with it. It is what happens. But
okay, so let me give you an example of that, and then I want to do a question from the stream. This would be interesting for you, okay? When I first started teaching this class, and I wanted to have a conversation about wealth inequality, I always knew I could find poor students in the class. There are poor students, lots of poor students. Right back when you all were here, I just feel like, hey, I need someone who was raised in a trailer park. I'd be like, okay, hands are going up. I need someone who's just one after another, okay? 2 years ago, I was going to do this thing on wealth and poverty. And I was going around the room trying to find a black student. And I knew not even to ask any Africans because that wasn't going to find. So someone who's African American, all right, who is poor. I couldn't find, I bet I asked 40 people, 40 black students till I finally got to someone. I'm like, hey man. And they were like, oh yeah, no, yeah, I'm in the lower class. In the past, that's just part of life. So what you just said right there is like, yeah, because so the people that are going to come to Penn State, you're not coming here if you don't have money. You're from out of state. I know you have money because like whatever, because we're not giving scholarships out in the same way anymore. So it's like, yeah, that's how it is. So this is separating, you go to Penn State, okay, it separates. And if you don't, then you're going to go somewhere else. And it's just so interesting to see these kinds of changes happening. Does money equal happiness, man? There you go, the three of you, really fast. No. To what degree does money equal happiness? No?
Not necessarily.
No?
Not at all, but it helps be safe and secure.
Yeah. No? Yeah, do you meet enough people that...
Some of the wealthiest people are the least happy.
Yeah.
And some of the poorest have the most.
I agree with that. I meet lots of people. Okay. Kamir says, in what ways might someone say it's much better to grow up poor instead of wealthy?
I mean, I grew up poor. Like my cousins, they lived on huts built on stilts over water that was like infested with filth. So I think, but as long as we had family, I know like many wealthy families, there's their parents that are CEOs, they're always working overtime, and the kids are usually like babysat, and they never really get that like quality time with their parents. But me, I grew up, I feel like I had a lot more like happy like moments with my family, and even if we were poor, we had basically nothing, we still found ways to kind of provide that happiness.
Okay, so I have a question for you. To what degree is this a thing that people who are poor, to what degree is this a story that you got to tell ourselves in order for us to just make sense of everything that we've seen today?
Yeah, I think it's just that hypothetical question, like, would you rather live poor and like very happy or wealthy and miserable? Because like at the end of life, like you're not going to take all your money with you to the grave, but rather, your memories and happiness.
Well, then I go back, if you go back to the Larry Ellison thing, dude, 30,000 families, man. At what point, where is the, go back one, the Trump tax cuts fundamentally benefited people up here, fundamentally, more than people down here. Didn't benefit these people at all. It's like, I wonder, as a sociologist, where's the rage, man? Like, what happened? What happened to change things in my time of teaching? When you all were here, there was rage at stuff like this. And now you all are here, I don't see it. It's interesting.